welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our April Mitchell Hour. I think in this crowd, it's no secret that today's Air Force is not resourced to meet the threats that are currently facing it. With bombers predating the Cuban Missile Crisis, an undersized fleet of fifth-generation fighters, a mobility force stretched thin, space assets that are under threat, and cyber standing as a neck-and-neck race every day, we're asking a heck of a lot of our airmen as we expect them to add 2 and 2 and get to 5. Something's got to change. And that's why we're particularly happy to have Dr. Will Roper joining us today. As you all know, he's the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force for Acquisition, Technology, and Logistics, and his vision, insight, and drive are propelling the Air Force ahead to empower our airmen. I don't know if you can be able to work the 2 + 2 = 5 thing, but I know you're trying. Will's no stranger to Washington. Prior to his current position, he was the founding director of the Pentagon Strategic Capabilities Office. And before that, he served as the acting chief architect at the Missile Defense Agency. And Will, I sat next to your old boss, Trey Obrey, on the airplane coming back from Colorado Springs yesterday. I got all kinds of stories. But those are going to have to wait until afterwards. So with that, please join me in welcoming our guest speaker, Dr. Will Roper.
Dave, thanks very much for the introduction. Can everyone hear me okay? Good? I'll give you some introductory remarks, but I know everyone here is an expert in defense. And so I have just as much to learn from you as you do from me. And the thing that I find so energizing about this job, and you wouldn't think that Air Force acquisition would be the most energizing job in the world, but it's the best job in the Air Force. That's my task today, is I want to leave here making you think, man, that's a job I want to put on everyone's radar screen. That is a job I want to have people in industry saying I want to go do. One of the coolest jobs in the Defense Department. And it is. So it is going to be a sad day when I can't do this anymore. And I'm going to go kicking and screaming out of the office because every day I learn something. Learn something about the Air Force. I learn something about defense, about national security. Because there is so much that is happening right now. And it's really exciting, but it also makes me really nervous. There's no guarantee that we're going to get the choices in front of us right. And so I feel a sense of urgency every day. That's task 2 for me. I want to leave you feeling urgent about our future. So before we jump into things that are happening in Air Force acquisition, I want to start with the context of why they matter. You know, why reform acquisition, right? It's been talked about for decades. Why is it so important that we do it now? So there's a who factor and there's a why factor. And I'm going to start with the who. That's kind of backwards. You would think you'd want to start with why, but I'm going to start with who because it's the most important part of the equation. When you get to do Air Force acquisition and go around to all sorts of places across this country where people are building, buying, and sustaining the systems that make up the world's most cutting-edge Air Force, you come back inspired every time. The people in Air Force acquisition are amazing. That is not a tagline. It's not that leadership statement you have to say. Every day I get my mind blown by what people are doing because we're empowering them. So I'm just back from Space Symposium. I took an extra day to go out to Space Camp. It's a software factory out in Colorado Springs where we have airmen. They're in T-shirts and hoodies when it's cold. And they're writing code with space operators side by side, pushing that code into the Combined Space Operations Center 4 weeks from the need identified. You'll feel like you're in a software company. You won't feel like you're in the Air Force until you talk to the airmen. You will get this crystal clear sense of mission, this absolute urgent focus on the mission and the threat. And even though you'll see a T-shirt with an alien in Space Camp on it, rest assured these are people that are warfighters of the future. They are competing for the Air Force's cutting edge. And they're not alone. We have teams like this in Kessel Run in Boston, Bespin It's a software factory down in Montgomery, writing mobile apps to help in logistics. Unified Platform, our cyber warriors are pushing tools in weeks as well, and many more. Just around the Air Force, people are taking the reins to do things that haven't been done before. And it's not just software. People are taking time out of their programs. They're using digital engineering. And when you step back from it, you just think, my goodness, with all of this talent, why hasn't anyone ever empowered them? I mean, we do that in the operational side of the Air Force. The whole OODA loop, right? John Boyd, the OODA loop matters, right? If you can't observe, orient, and decide faster than your enemy, then you lose. And we believe that in the Air Force. And I see it in all the operational units that if you can't delegate more than your enemy, then you will lose. Your enemy will be more responsive to you, will be able to make decisions faster. And yes, you may make the occasional mistake, but overall, statistically, you'll win. Why has no one brought the OODA loop into acquisition? I think it's because we haven't had a competitive mindset. And the Pentagon has always tended to trust process over people. And so I invite you to be part of our cause, part of our rebellion, that people beat process every day. I trust the people in Air Force acquisition. The reforms that we are doing, the pith of them, their core, is that we're going to give the reins to people and not over-encumber them with a centralized process that by default must be generic. Acquisition at my level will be generic. A process I would use to review programs will be generic. I cannot take the time to look at every program and come up with a specific set of guidance that makes sense only to it. And think about the wide swath of things we buy, from bombers to satellites to cyber to services. There's no way to put a wrapper around the whole thing that's going to be efficient. Well, that is the way acquisition has been, centralized, process-driven. And so when you see the talent that I get to see every day, your strategy is obvious. Let's put these people in charge. Let's delegate authority to them. So then what do we do in the headquarters of acquisition? It was simple. If you've got people who are talented, you need to make new tools for them. You need to give them top cover. You need to encourage them that you are going to have their back when they make decisions that aren't popular. And that's all that I've been doing for the 13 months I've gotten to be a part of this awesome team. I've enjoyed every day I've gotten to spend with the Air Force. I'll let you read what you'd like into that statement. I absolutely believe in our people. And though I often talk about the systems and the threat, I want you to know that I am leaning forward and urgent because I am anchored in the bedrock of the talent that we have. So for all future Air Force leaders, I want to thank you for the time and talent that you have created in the Air Force acquisition enterprise. You have invested in the education and the training, and it's a wonderful gift to be given. And believe me, everything else I'm about to tell you about moving fast and competing, none of it makes sense without that talent to back it up. So if you were a part of that, thank you. That's who. We have amazing people, so we have the ability to do amazing things. Let's talk about why we need to do them. So I'll get to the threats like China and Russia, but in my view, China and Russia are really like wind socks that are manifesting wind. They're manifesting something bigger. They just happen to be the thing we look at when we think about why we are worried about the future. The thing that is worrisome, the thing that is the gale force wind that's making the windsock move, is just how much technology exists in the world today. There has never been as much technology as exists today, nor has its rate of change been as high, nor have there been as many technologies that are accelerating that pace of change. And that's what should have us afraid, but also really excited. If you look back at the Cold War, technology change was relatively slow. It took, in some cases, decades to mature new technologies. And if you look at the systems that came out of the Cold War, they're awesome, but they often had 4 or 5 technologies that had to be matured. Think of the F-22. There's radar technology, weapon technology, stealth technology, all of which had to be matured to give you the dominant fighter it is today. And so any program that has technology maturation as part of it will be slow. Technology maturation is a difficult thing to accelerate. You're pushing the envelope into cutting edge research and you just don't know when it's going to work. Now, when you think about that model from the Cold War that looks at technology maturation as a thing mostly done inside the government, and it was, right? The technologies that were created then have changed the world. So the microprocessor computer, the internet, satellite, high band antennas, all of which now that they've moved into the commercial space, have become cheaper and ubiquitous, and you have the Internet of Things that's changing the world rapidly. The technology was generated inside the government, but now we're still doing great technology inside the government. Don't listen to people who say that we're not. I think we've been fairly steady in the rate at which we've produced new technology. But that's now part of a much bigger tech ecosystem that includes commercial development and academic development. And so if technology is everywhere, that model that we have from the Cold War that matures technology in the government and puts it in systems and makes the moves in the chess game decades apart is dangerous to carry into this century. Don't let people tell you the acquisition system is broken. I think it's a very Washington thing to say, mostly by people who have not done acquisition, who've never managed a program. The acquisition system is antiquated now. It won the Cold War. I realize that programs often went over cost and budget, but it did give us the cutting-edge Air Force we have today. So I always ask people, well, are you unhappy with the Air Force that you have? So there might be a better way to have done it, looking back, but it did do its job. It's just an antiquated system today. And the question we should ask ourselves is, what does the acquisition system need to look like when technology is everywhere and changing all the time? And it will have to be different. So with technology everywhere, you know what part two of the fear is that this technology is available to everyone. The model from the Cold War is based on technology exclusivity. We're going to build a technology no one else will have. We'll keep it very secret. We'll put it in our systems. And then on day one of the war, surprise. Well, if the technology is available to everyone, there's no exclusivity. So the only thing that makes sense to me, and I ask you to challenge me on this if you disagree, but if the technology is available to everyone, then time to market has to be your cutting edge. It's the DuPont model. It's eventually going to be copied and ripped off, so be there first. Be able to productize first, use it first. And by the time your second responders have done the same, you're on to something else. And so speed in acquisition, which was the big litmus test for me coming into this job, talking with Air Force leadership. You know, I'm huge fans of General Goldfein, who introduced me to Secretary Wilson, and Secretary Wilson has been an awesome boss for me. And when I talked with her first about doing this job, I said, cost isn't the right thing to focus on. It's what every government official wants to do, but it's not going to win. If we focus solely on saving money, and I realize that's a great talking point in Washington, and it speaks strongly to the responsibility we feel to the taxpayer, and we want to not spend more money than we have to. But if that's our focus, then we're going to lose with more money in our pockets. Time is everything. It may not be the only thing, but it's the only thing you need to get right to tell the losers what those other things are. So speed is going to continue to be our focus. Because in the context of having technology everywhere that can be used by any threat that we have, like China and Russia, we have to get to market first. And that just simply means that we're bringing a competitive mindset to acquisition. We're not taking time out of programs because it's cute, because it's a talking point, because it makes a good PowerPoint slide, because that is time stolen from enemies that we give to our warfighters. And I don't know what technology is going to be the thing that changes national security. I'm happy to share some thoughts with you today, but there are a lot. Could be artificial intelligence, maybe not. If you really read into AI, it has a lot of great advantages. It's also very brittle. So maybe it's a glass sword, maybe it's not. Could be ubiquitous sensing. We're an Air Force that's accustomed to hiding. Future, we may not be able to, but also you could imagine that being used as a potent weapon for us. So maybe that changes national security. Maybe quantum will emerge. It's been in the background for a while, seems like some progress is being made. Maybe that comes out and fundamentally changes how sensors and computing is done. Maybe biotech comes in, makes radically different options for weapons that we might not build under current policies and laws, but that opponents might. Or maybe it's none of those, and it's something that we're not aware of today. But if you can't predict what it is, the only thing you can do to prepare for it is to have an engine that can take it, ingest it, field it, and get it out to the operator faster than anyone else. Then repeat, repeat, repeat. So I want to share with you today what we're doing to try to have that competitive engine, what we're doing to try to go ahead and prep in some of these technology areas, and then also how we want to pay for this. Because you can't start with a clean sheet of paper. All of you know this. And I think that's the death of most strategies that I've seen in government. I don't read them. I don't think I've read a government document since being in this job other than the things I have to read for acquisition, legally and by policy. But government strategies always start with what we want the future to be. And the more constraining thing is where we are now. So you have to build a strategy out of where we are today. And the last time I spoke here, I wasn't in the Air Force. I was back at the Strategic Capabilities Office. And I think that was the thing that really helped us work with the services, is our strategies always started with what the service had today and helped take the next step. So let me walk you through this. So let's talk about speeding up. I'm going to give you some things that are true and not true about speed and acquisition. The first thing that's true is that you can do most things that you want with the DoD 5000 process and the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. It's just 8.5 pounds of policies and laws. So it tells you that if they're 8.5 pounds when you print it out, there are going to be a lot of reasons to say no. There's a whole lot of no, but you've got to have consistent yes from the top of your leadership chain all the way to the bottom to use the exceptions to the rules to maneuver through quickly. So the Section 804 authorities, have you heard of that sort of thing? Yeah, it's something I think is very Washington, but let me let you in on a secret. It doesn't give us a lot of new authority. Right? It's talked about like it's this new thing in acquisition. It doesn't give you much. But what it does do, and I'm so thankful to Congress for it, is it does send a crystal clear message, a clarion call from Congress that we want you to move fast. And so what 804 has done for the Air Force, and we're doing more than any other service, I think than all the services combined. We had the first one before there was even policy from the department, is it allows a program manager to brand their program, to put a seal on it that says, I'm fast and I'm smart. Come check out what I'm doing. And then once that happened with one program, other program managers who heard that that's what Will wants us to do, figured out that they could do things in their programs to take time out. They could take smart risk. And eventually, slides were going around the Air Force that said, don't do any 5,000 programs because the boss doesn't like them. Well, I do like 5,000 programs. The authority is more or less the same, but what the authority with 804 is doing a culture change, which is really how you want to do acquisition reform. No one wants to do a new organizational chart or a process. That is such a government response. We have a problem, let's create an organization that is designed to solve the problem and a new process that's going to solve it, and then declare victory when the org chart is made. And that never works, and you know it. This is about culture, and I'm seeing it. I wish I could mind meld with everyone. You would be so excited. You would think, oh, our future Air Force is going to be awesome, and it will, because culture change is happening. I love it when our senior material leaders, our 06s, have FAST in their programs, but they're coming to me and reviewing them. I would expect them to. They have to get through their decision gate. What excites me the most are the first and second lieutenants that are doing it, and the captains that I only see in like a random way, but that are so excited, that are so energized, because they believe that they have top cover to move. And so 804 now is, I'd say we've taken out about 60 years with that authority and about 30 years with our tailored 5,000 approaches. These are program managers taking the margin, the conservatism out of their programs. They're not taking rigor out. I'll tell you, as a former program manager, and I realize now I was never a very good one, I was not efficient. I had good people that got programs to the goal line for me. Everyone working on our team is better at it than I was, and I learned things that I think, I screwed that one up on my watch. But they're taking out the margin that's there because of the fear of leadership review, the fear that discovery creates that come to Jesus moment. I expect there to be discovery. Every program has them. In fact, if there's not, you're not pushing the envelope enough. We can take discovery out of programs if you want the world's 4th or 5th best Air Force. Not the best. So we're telling them discovery is okay. We have awards now in the Air Force for good failure called Spectacular Learning Event Awards. And we haven't given enough out. Still have people kind of saying, is this really okay? It really is. Because I know that our acquisition portfolio is a distribution. It's risk reward. And that if I'm not seeing, on the bell curve, if I'm not seeing those failures, then I'm not going to see the big successes as well, the big gains. So we're going to keep encouraging people to take risk because it will pull time out of our programs. And we will get to, we're very close. If you look at what's in the hopper, we're very close to getting to the 100-year mark that we set less than a year ago. And I'm going to do my very best to reach it before Secretary Wilson departs as just a thank you to her for bringing a focus and a positivity to acquisition. It's wonderful to have a Secretary of the Air Force talk so much about acquisition. And her speech at Space Symposium, I think, just speaks to how much that she cares about our acquisition workforce and is excited about what's happening. And it's just been great being a partner with her on doing the change. So taking time out is really about culture change. You empower people. You tell them, we're going to trust you, we're going to give you top cover, and we're going to be okay with failures. But we also have to do some mechanistic reforms to get true speed in programs. And let me tell you what some of those are, some of the mechanisms that have to happen. So software is a big one. So I mentioned in my introduction that I just got back from Space Camp, and if you heard of Kessel Run, is that, so any of you able to go to one of those places yet? A few hands? Yeah, they're awesome. Agile is happening faster in the Air Force than I would have predicted before coming in. And that speaks to the talent that we have. And if you're not familiar with Agile development or DevOps, DevSecOps is the current instantiation of it, it's really just bringing lean manufacturing principles to software development. So remember in the 50s when Toyota did their factory overhaul, they did the Kanban system, right? You started doing quality across the line rather than doing quality at the end. What happened? They sped up their plant, got a higher quality product at the end. Well, you couldn't do that in software in the 70s. The waterfall process just was not able to retire quality issues in mid-production. They got passed to final assembly, and then by the time you got there wasn't enough time to debug big issues that had accumulated. So errors traveled, which is what you don't want to do in manufacturing. Well, now modern tools, cloud-based tools, allow you to do those quality checks all along the production line of software. And so Agile software development, or DevOps, is simply just bringing in what we have known about manufacturing into software. You bring the operators in because they're your OODA loop, they're your quality check. You let the problems be retired when they're small, and what we're seeing is the pipeline accelerates, and the product coming out the end is faster. So I'm really happy that we've made the shift really quickly. But now I can see that we've got about 10 software factories across the Air Force. There's something we've got to work ahead on. And that's we've got to standardize how we do the development. Already every program has to pick their own cloud, their own development tools. And I've realized we've got a gap in the Air Force. We've got a gap in terms of standardizing the development environment the same way that we standardized the IT environment. So when you're a program in the Air Force, you don't have to pick your phones or your computers. Well, you might, because there's a lot we could do to improve IT in the Air Force. And I think I get to recompete the IT contract for the Air Force, and I am really looking forward to that because I would like my computers to work for once. But the idea of the CIO and IT makes sense, right? You don't want the program to be expert in information technology. You want them to be able to communicate on day one at any level of classification. We need the equivalent of that in software. So expect that that's a change that'll happen over this year, is allowing programs that shift to Agile to be able to code on day one, or right now that they can't. Another thing we're going to have to take on is the continuous authority to operate. When you can code at a monthly rate, the process that we use to authorize operation takes longer than the coding cycle. So yeah, we'll get you your approval in 4 months. I'll have 4 software loads by that point. So we are trying to prototype a continuous authority to operate, where if you code within certain parameters, you can immediately deploy. And if you're thinking about competing with China or Russia, we may have to move code on a monthly basis, a weekly basis, maybe every day in a conflict. So we'll have to have a different way to know that code is safe to use. We're going to have a different way to test and evaluate to know that that safety is there. And I'm really excited to say that our testing community and our CIO have risen to the challenge. And I want you to hear one important point from me. I talk about moving fast in acquisition. That's the part that I play. Acquisition is bigger than SAF AQ. Acquisition is a huge team that involves legal, it involves finance, it involves our requirements, it involves our testers. And it's really important for me to share with you, this is a team sport. Everyone is picking up their game to go fast. Why wouldn't they? This is much more energizing than going slow. Would you have come to a talk on slower, dumber acquisition? No. So it's fun to be part of a team doing something that's never done before. So a lot of times I'm told, well, our testers I don't allow any negativity in our meetings. If there is an issue, it's not a problem. It means that we've identified another opportunity to excel. It's amazing what happens when you don't allow negative statements in meetings. And they aren't allowed for me. There are no problems, only opportunities. Those opportunities are letting other people excel. If you had the head of our operational test, General Brewer, he would show you his plan to do operational tests fast, integrated with development tests, taking time out of the system, because he's part of our Go Fast team. So I'm really happy that the software push is actually bringing in other parts of the Air Force and making us focus on things that we haven't done before. And expect over the next coming months, we'll announce a pretty cool software challenge we're going to do in one of our biggest programs to show that going fast and doing amazing things in software isn't just small software endeavors that touch the operational edge. We can do it in major defense acquisition programs. And the fact that we're taking on Alice in Kessel Run, right, the Autonomic Logistics Information System, right, that's the F-35 ground logistics support. And again, it's common to say that it's broken or it's horrible. Again, that's negative speak. It was coded in an older era. I'm confident Lockheed would not have coded it that way today. Well, Lockheed's part of our team. They've given us the source code. It's hosted in a cloud. We're pulling apart. And this month, we'll deploy the first Agile delivery out to Nellis, which should take about 10 to 15 hours of work out of our maintainers' lives every week. Huge value. That's what Agile allows you to do. You don't have to think about, what do I need to accomplish over the next 3 to 5 years? I can look at an operator and say, what can I give you this month that improves your life? What's next? What's next? And that's what these cloud development tools allow us to do, that kind of deployment. Another thing that we've got to mechanize as a means for speed is digital engineering. I hate it. It's becoming a Pentagon buzzword, as is agile development, as is artificial intelligence. Every briefing has them. And I call them everything bagel briefings, when you can find all the buzzwords in the briefing. And I believe none of them. Digital engineering is awesome. It might be the game changer for the future Air Force. It might be the biggest technology that affects our warfighting lethality on my watch in this job, and maybe for my successors. I want to explain why. I think when digital engineering is talked about, it's often talked about as super modeling, right? Uber modeling, we can do great things, we believe the results. And that's true. So if you go out to our ground-based strategic deterrent program, They can sit you down in what we call the sandbox. We're not using paper documents in that program. Everything is in this live environment. And you can ask them to do a requirements change to that program. And they can instantaneously output the performance and the cost at the life cycle level, and can do that about 2 billion times in a day. It's amazing. They're prescient. They know as much about industry proposals as industry does. I have never seen such an empowered government team because they have the ability to model any permutation. That's where we are now. We're using this on A-10 wings, and we're starting to rotate some of our junior acquisition professionals through these programs so that as they become our leaders, they think this is how I need to govern my program. But let me tell you what's coming next. I can see coming from industry is that digital engineering is going to go all the way back to the design itself in industry and the manufacturing too. So the idea that your design, down to your supplier and your supplier's supplier, could come in to production and go together like Legos is almost here. The Toyota revolution, the automation revolution that we have seen in automotive industry is going to happen in aviation and is going to happen in satellites. And we have to do everything in our power in the Air Force to encourage it. If that happens, then the future becomes amazingly possible. I'm going to cover that a little later. What would we do if we had that kind of defense industrial base? So I'm going to leave you hanging on that. I think a final thing that we've got to improve on is just empowering our contracting workforce. So I have heard contracting officers much maligned in the Air Force by people who don't let contracts. Let me state for the record with all of you that no one takes more risk than a contracting officer. You are legally and criminally responsible. I want you to think about that. Feel how you would feel when I tell you, go fast, sign your name here, and it's billions of dollars. And by the time this flares up in the media, I'm probably not in this job anymore. It takes time for this stuff to play out. Just that's their reality. Our contracting workforce is amazing. You can do almost anything in the federal acquisition regulations if you believe that you have top cover. And so one of the things I ask you, because the Mitchell Institute will be here doing monthly talks long after I have left Air Force acquisition, please continue to tell Air Force leaders to give top cover. It is the most important thing to compete. The team and talent can do it, but it has to be every member of the team, the requirements owner, the acquisition professional, the tester, the contracting officer that signs their name on the dotted line. We have amazing contracting ninjas that are doing things I've never seen done before. And so I hope that we'll continue empowering them to take time out of programs, because that's an area where there is ripe fruit on the vine to be picked, right? The year it takes to get on an initial contract, the months it takes to renegotiate. But if we can shoot through that, then we may go far beyond the 100-year mark and maybe reach a second century. There may be more mechanisms that we need to focus on for speed, but that's our focus now in headquarters. We do the things we have to do by law, but we're trying to create as many tools and as much empowerment as we can so that the place where real acquisition happens out in the field has as many ways to get to the goal line as they can. Let me talk about the second part of what we need to do to be competitive, and that's focus on the industrial base. In a lot of meetings, I have to stop the discussion and say, that's going to kill our industry base. We've gotten so accustomed to it shrinking, I think we accept that it's like the inverse of entropy in the universe. That entropy will always go up and the defense industrial base will always come down and collapse. And that isn't the case. The acquisition system from the Cold War applied in this century continues to shrink the industry base. It's important to understand why. So go back to the Cold War model. It's based on technology maturation. That takes time. It takes decades in many cases before you get technology to take that next step change function. Well, that means you're awarding contracts every decade, building aircraft in some cases every other decade, satellites every decade. That is not enough competition to keep multiple people in the market, and certainly not enough to encourage new entrants to come into it. So I am really worried that we're about to collapse our defense industry base to a Monty Python-esque single defense prime that competes the military departments for its services, vice versa. We're down to just a few tactical aircraft manufacturers. We once had dozens. That tells us that we need to shake ourselves and come up with a new model for working with them. Well, if you listened to that introduction to the industry-based problem, you know what the solution is. We've got to find a way to award contracts more quickly. We can't build things every other decade. And that's the end of the teaser I laid out. What I think digital engineering could do for the Air Force is allow us to compete things more frequently and not buy the large quantities that the major defense acquisition programs do today. For us to truly be the next generation Air Force that we also covet, also wait for, long for, we've got to kill the major defense acquisition program as it is today and replace it with something that looks more like the Century Series development of the early Air Force. And I see that possible in digital engineering. I see the ability to have families of systems that share commonality across the family so that you're not creating a training issue, moving from plane to plane or satellite to satellite. And most importantly, not creating a sustainment issue, because that's what would kill a very heterogeneous Air Force, is if the sustainment costs jacked, moving across airplanes that maybe are bought in the 50 to 100 level, opposed to the many hundreds, and in our case, thousands. I see that possible if we commit to it. But we're going to have to retrain, rethink, re-engage with industry to bring in this new advent. And we can't do it going back. We're not going to be able to go back and take planes that are in production and say, let's digitize them, right? They already are what they are. They're analog, and we're going to have to continue them. That's a tough thing in acquisition reform, is a lot of people that want to tell you how to do it get to start with a clean sheet. But in the place that it really happens in the services, you have to fix the plane while you're flying it. So this is what should happen for our next generation of programs. And I'm pulling in people from across the Air Force to have a strategy to make this the whetstone that keeps our cutting edge sharp. So that's part of the industry base that we don't talk about. When we talk about the industry base and expanding it, we typically are talking about non-traditional companies and working with tech startups, and I'm super passionate about that. But I wanted to start with this idea of shrinking the time of development cycles, shrinking the time of contract awards, because we have to have a strategy for our defense primes too. We are not going to be able to turn to a tech startup and build a stealth plane anytime soon. So the primes often mirror us in government, and as we change, we have to help them change too. Well, let's talk about the other side, the non-traditional defense industry base. Well, we're fools if we don't turn ourselves inside out to work with it. If we truly believe that the tech ecosystem that is commercial is going to be the biggest impactor of future national security, we need to work with those impactors. And we don't know who they are. They're probably across this country in small companies with big ideas that don't have the U.S. Air Force on its radar screen. So it's been a big push for me to not just have a tech startup event or a nice day where we said, yep, we brought in some companies we haven't worked with before, we put them on contract. I really wanted to change the process that we use to engage them, and we're not even close to being done. There's going to be a lot of reform in small business work in the Air Force. And I don't even like that term, small business. I'm going to have to use it today because a lot of our accounts are called Small Business Innovative Research, but I don't like that term. I think it's pejorative. I think it belies that this is less important than the normal business work that we do. I think our small business work is the most important work that we do, is growing our industry base in an ecosystem that is going to contain those technologies that change the future. So the pitch day that we did about a month ago is the first step. One step, it's not a trend, but it was a big event for the department, I'd say for the US government. If you're not aware of what we did, and these are our amazing contracting ninjas that did this, is we were able to put on a pitch event where startups, tech startups from across the country were able to come in, pitch their idea to us, very similar to a Shark Tank, where we had a source selection team and operators in the room, and after 15 minutes of hearing a presentation, then the grilling starts. We had done our homework on the company before, and then if we were satisfied that their idea was good and useful for the future Air Force, then they left on a half-page contract and were paid by the Air Force in less than 15 minutes in every case. Like over 50 companies, and the fastest that we did was 3. Now, the way that we paid a lot of those companies was with government credit cards. And that was a cool thing that this town has picked up on, and the Pentagon has picked up on. It's kind of cool, swiping a square reader, you're on contract and you have money in your account. What I want to share with you is people that I know care about like the more than just the surface layer of a story, is that who cares about the credit card? We can pay them any way we want. The reason we wanted to do that pitch event was to demonstrate to industry, demonstrate to tech startups, that they could count on cash from us the day that we said. Not, we're going to put you on contract. Great, when am I going to get money? Well, I don't know. 3 months is fast, right? If we put industry on contract in 3 months, even with an other transaction agreement, like we're high-fiving each other in the Air Force. We're so fast, we're lightning. You're not even credible. We're not even credible in that space. For very small companies, that's the difference between whether they make payroll or not, or whether the owner is getting paid or paying their employees. We had so many companies say, I don't have to go get a bridge loan. Right? I can start working immediately on your problem. I don't have to worry. It's about telling tech startups, put us on your critical path. And they should. They should. Here's why. We have deep accounts. It's crazy when you sign up an Air Force acquisition, you're looking at all the accounts we have across the Air Force, and you look at this Small Business Innovative Research Fund, and it's $660 million every year. And you're like, oh, this is great. What do we use it for? Not much. What's expected of it? Not much. What has it done for us? Not much. And the reason why is we've been working in a process that's too slow to work with the startups that we want to work with. And we've also been working with that account more like a research account and less like an acquisition account. So step 2 of the reforming how we work with small business is to start treating those dollars not as research dollars, but as acquisition dollars, and having our programs and our program executive officers be responsible for managing the account and for doing those pitch days across the country. It is about using resources that have been provided by Congress to bring more and more companies into orbit around us. And not forever. We hope that they'll orbit around us to slingshot to bigger and better things in the commercial sector. We hope that the next generation of tech magnates will know the Air Force and feel a connection with us and feel a connection to national security, and that we will have been part of their growth. So step 2 is pulling our program executives in, and now they are responsible for overseeing and funding that account, executing that account, and running pitch days across the country. And so the Secretary announced over Space Symposium that space is going to be our next pitch day in the fall. And we hope that we'll see some amazing companies pushing the envelope in launch and in satellites and in digital technology like AI, and that when they come to give their pitch, that they will know that if it's thumbs up, it's not just thumbs up, it's thumbs up and money in your account that day. Put us on your critical path. We have to even go beyond that. That's just working with companies once they start. We also have to go left of that and start thinking about how we start companies. And yeah, that doesn't sound like stuff that we do in acquisition. We're not investors. We've got to be. To work with this ecosystem, we have to think like an investor. We have a different account, $200 million, that can be used to get technology out of universities and into startups that we've not really put to use. So 2 weeks ago, we signed a memorandum of understanding with MIT. So first one that they've done with a government organization, but was really excited to see their enthusiasm and our enthusiasm about creating an AI accelerator to get research up at their Center for AI Research, their CCEL, which is the Computer Science and AI Laboratory. Awesome place. It was one of the organizations that helped image the black hole, which as a recovering physicist, I thought that was just super awesome. but to get ideas that researchers have out and into companies. And if you think that that is not important, a lot of the researchers said the AI industry right now is so focused on the current instantiation of commercial applications for internet devices, it's mostly entertainment and internet focused, that the next generation of ideas are not getting funding. So the AI that we need may not be the AI that exists right now online. It's pretty fragile. It's very beatable. And once our adversaries know we have AI in our systems, you know what's going to happen. Same thing that happened once they knew we had low observability. The countermeasure game will begin. We need to be funding that research. We need to be inviting researchers who say, that's the kind of AI I want to do, to know that they have a pipeline to get from the university into their startup and that we're going to be there and you can depend on us. And that once they spin out, that then they move into that $660 million account and can grow their idea, their company, without having to go to a venture capitalist if they don't want to, without having to give up equity in their company. So big ambitions, folks, but we have to have big ambitions to compete. I hope that by the time we're done with this and we bring the billions of dollars that we have to bear, that an innovator anywhere in this country will think, I'm going to the Air Force first because I've got nothing to lose. I know I can trust that they can deliver on the day they say. I know their cash won't dilute. They're not going to ask for equity in my company. And we have fairly low return on investment expectations. We are a very patient investor compared to the VC world. So I think we can play a powerful role. And I don't want to play one that's orthogonal or antagonistic with VCs. A lot of the researchers that I saw up at MIT and I've seen across the nation, I thought, I could buy your product in the military before it would be commercially viable. I could pay a higher price point. I could see the U.S. Air Force being a powerful bridge for innovators where they can work with us, grow their idea, grow their company, not have to give up equity, have a customer that can buy at a higher price point so they can work that price point down and become commercially viable. Repeat, so that we compete. I'm very passionate about this topic, so excuse the long-windedness, but please hear that we have to do this. This can't be a talking point. You should hold officials accountable for growing the industry base. We will be okay for a year, a decade, maybe more if we don't. But I don't see us being able to win a 30, 40, 50-year competition with China if we're not growing the space of innovators. So that's part two. Part three is the how we pay for it. This is a big culture shift too. When you're going through confirmation for the service acquisition executive job, almost all the questions are about major defense acquisition programs. And then once you're inside the Air Force, you realize, oh, that's only 10% of what we do. And there's 70% that's the dark matter and dark energy of the Air Force. It's most of what the Air Force acquisition is made up of, but you don't see it from the outside. And that is the sustainment and logistics enterprise, which rarely gets limelight. Is there anyone here that was part of Air Force logistics or sustainment? Sir? So heroes. That's how the Air Force flies, fights, and wins today. So to keep the physics analogies going, they're defying entropy, while other parts of the Air Force are defying gravity. They're keeping planes flying decades after they've been made, in many cases, starting to be easier to talk about how close to a century like those planes are rather than just talk about how many decades they are. And with the B-52 going to near a century old in our future plan, they're going to have to blaze new trail for keeping airplanes flying. But when you come in from the outside and you don't know much about sustainment, and that's true of a lot of acquisition executives. We're developers typically, or producers. And then sustainment's that thing, I don't have to worry about because I'm not going to be asked many questions about it, either in hearings or in open forums like this. It is the side of the Air Force that I see the potential for the most radical change because it has very little new technology, but a wonderful creative workforce. Some of the most creative people I have found in the Air Force are in sustainment. Who knew? But it makes sense because they're keeping old machines flying with a strict timeline, which means they have to be creative and finding a way to make the means reach the ends. And when I walk around our depots, I've never been to an Air Force depot, they're awesome. It is the best application of 1990s era Lean Six Sigma I have ever seen. I wish that our industry colleagues would do the same. But what I see, which is so sad, is a lot of paper. I don't see any of the technologies that I would expect in a commercial endeavor of that kind. I don't see additive manufacturing. I don't see an enterprise that's digitized, because the Air Force writ large has never invested in them. Sustainment is just something we pay for. It's a bill. And so we've created new organizations. We've created a whole 3-star program executive officer just focused on sustainment and innovation, our Rapid Sustainment Office, kind of the mirror of the Rapid Capabilities Office, which is a really cool office where you know you get to do cool things. We want our Rapid Sustainment Office to be a really cool office where you get to do cool things. And so far it is. They're bringing in technology we should have brought in years ago. So we've already transitioned 3D printing across the Air Force enterprise. We can print thousands of parts today. And we're even doing things that are now industry leading. We've certified materials and machines, not parts themselves. So you can print any parts you want as long as you're using the correct material. And now we've even gone beyond plastics. We're doing that for metals. We're doing safety critical parts and creating whole new engineering formalisms for how do you certify a part coming off of a printer and know it's safe to use. This has a chance to save us tons of money, because a lot of our money goes into mitigating obsolescence. And when we're trying to replace those parts, and you see, articles that pop up in the press, we're paying however many thousands of dollars for whatever part. You're not really. It's only in this part of the Air Force that we lump together the production and the development cost, and we just call it a lump price. What we're really doing when we try to go buy parts that we only need in small supply is we're turning to a company, we're giving them a huge stack of 2-dimensional drawings, and we're saying, we need this part. And then they have to go get their machining and their people and their production line ready to go. They have to demonstrate that they can produce the part. Here I can produce it. We would normally call that development. And we would have the development of that part be different from, all right, and now that I've shown you that I can produce it, I'm going to go into production and build 5. So you know if you're bidding on these that there's not going to be a lot of tail, and that you're going to have to put a lot of effort up front, and you're going to have to raise the price so it's profitable for you to do. What we're really doing with 3D printing is we're killing that development side, and we're able to achieve the production cost that we would have gotten normally, which is usually a few $100s per part. We're now achieving that in thousands of parts. But it's not just the money saving, which is awesome because it's saving more money than it's costing. It's increasing our readiness. We get that part faster. We're able to make it on demand. It's not just the additive manufacturing of parts, cool though it is. We're starting to do additive repair as well. We're opening advanced training centers across the country, about to open up another one in Pennsylvania. We've opened up one in Georgia. We'll be opening up one in Oklahoma, where we have the world's most cutting-edge 3D printers and 3D repairers. And we are training our operators, our airmen in the depots to use them, and then transitioning into the depot once they've learned how to do it. It's just as focused on training as it is the tech themselves. And going back to the creativity, we have seen that workforce rise and say, this is what I want to do. Because now working in an Air Force depot looks more and more commercially viable. You're working with the technologies you would be using in commercial industry, which is going to be great for us. So these training centers are doing things that we haven't been able to do with parts before. They can take engine parts and replace metal that has been sheared off. So engine parts are expensive. They are usually starting at $10,000 up to over $100,000 for main parts. The reason that we replace them is that we've gotten out of tolerances. Enough metal's been removed that we can't certify it as safe, got to buy another one. We can replace that metal now. That is speeding up our readiness and reducing cost. And the thing that I'm super excited about is that artificial intelligence is finally coming into the Air Force, but not where I would have expected it first, not on the operational side. It's coming into maintenance. So there are over 140 predictive maintenance algorithms deployed today, predicting things before they happen based on data. So makes total sense, right? Everyone probably has that sticker in the upper left of their windshield that tells you when you should change your oil. and none of you do it at 3,000 miles because you know 5,000 is good enough, but you know that based on data. You know that based on historical data that tells you when to take a proactive measure rather than a reactive measure. Air Force sustainment has been very reactive. It breaks, we fix it. In future, we're going to pull parts before they break. And if you ask the depots and the sustainment enterprise writ large, where does our time and money go? What's the money sink? It's unscheduled maintenance. That's our enemy. So the Rapid Sustainment Office and our sustainment enterprise writ large have done great. They've been off to a charge for 6 months, but we've got a long way to go to fully digitize the enterprise and bring in the best that commercial industry can bring. We've created a public-private partnership with Delta Airlines that made an amazing pivot in their ability to up readiness, and they're teaching us a lot about what we need to do next and next and next. That's something I hope that we'll continue doing. And if we're going to compete and win long-term, we need to be working and partnering with people who can teach us things, not just putting industry on contract. So I'm very thankful for the great support that we're getting from Delta, and just amazing what they were able to do when they made their revolutionary pivot to upping aircraft availability. We need to do the same thing. So that's my hope. My hope is that if we achieve savings that industry says we can achieve, and what they've told us, this is a variety of industry experts have said 10% can be done without really trying. Just bringing in the technology, you should see 10% cost reduction. But 10% cost reduction for 70% of the Air Force, that's enough to start doing more programs, more prototyping, actually doing things faster, so affording that rapid development pipeline, something that feels more like Century Series style development where you're always designing and building, even if you're not buying in quantity. We got to pay for that. Right? That's going to be billions of dollars to just keep that pipeline open. 10% savings and sustainment could do that. But a lot of industry experts have said 20% is what you really should aim for. I'm happy with 10%. 10% would be enough to make this strategy close. Speed up the acquisition pipeline because you don't know where the new technology is going to come from. Make sure that the way that acquisition engine is engaging the industry base is expanding it, not collapsing it. Be able to work with everyone because there's no way to know where the technology is going to pop that needs to go through that pipeline fast. And finally, you've got to bring down the total overhead of sustainment or there'll be no way to do those first two things. Not over time. So that strategy closes in my mind. All strategies need to. Fairly simple to say. The hard part's in the doing. But as I come back from traveling across the Air Force, we are doing it. We are doing it. It just takes time to fix the plane while you're flying it. I want to leave you with a final thought and then take any questions that you might have before I have to depart. One thing that bothers me a little bit is, are we thinking about the future Air Force the right way? What I've talked about really sounds like building a better version of today's Air Force for tomorrow, which I don't think we're ready to say that systems that have helped us win wars in the past that we're ready to depart from them. I'm not saying it's time to quit thinking about fighters and bombers and satellites. But let me ask you a question I've been asking myself. If we had no Air Force today and there was no defense industrial base, could we still build an Air Force? I think we could. Think about how much commercial space innovation there is. How much focus on satellites, focus on launch. By the way, one of the things I am the most excited about for the future Air Force is responsive launch that appears to be almost here. Right? So many companies working on different technologies, cheap rockets, airborne rockets, slingshot rockets. I mean, it's crazy, but these companies may help us put satellites up on demand. Could you build a kind of space power with that? Of course. Your adversary wouldn't know what they have to contest. They would have to have global space situational awareness, which would be a vulnerability to them. It would give you the ability to have a deterrent posture because the uncertainty of what you could do and the magnitude of what you could do might make them think it's not worth doing it. So yes, you could bring that in. Could you bring in commercial drones? Of course. Could you bring in artificial intelligence to try to do things in a disaggregated way? yes, we could probably build an Air Force. And so the thing that's bothering me in the back of my mind is, are we really thinking about the orthogonal concepts that will be the new for tomorrow? And the one thing that I have a little fear about, I'm mostly optimistic, I'm seeing it happen, is I fear us holding on to past concepts beyond their future usefulness. And I think the fear of pivoting to new and what it could do is a fear all organizations have, that the change will be negative to my slice of the pie. My prediction is that it'll actually make most slices of the pie more interesting. Artificial intelligence, which I think we fear in the operational side of the Air Force, because in the back of minds, though never stated, is it's eventually going to take away the need for pilots. You all are thinking that, and that Air Force brass will never go that way. I don't think that's what AI will do, not in its first instantiation. I think it's going to make being a pilot more exciting than it's ever been. And the young generation that's working on artificial intelligent pilots, for me, is so excited about this. I talked earlier, AI appears to be really fragile. So I don't see any ability to get the humans out, but I see a huge potential for giving those humans a capability they don't have today. A faster OODA loop in certain circumstances might be their cutting edge. So we've got to go there. And that's the last thing I'd ask you to keep encouraging us. Let go of the old and do the new. The Air Force, more than any other service, loves technology at its core. That's what I love about being part of this organization. Being a new service, it didn't have a past, so its identity had to be its future. Whatever was new, yeah, we want that. We'll find a way to fight with that. We've had a good run for the last 20 years, haven't been contested by anyone. Best Air Force in the world, really the only service that can fight in its own domain and win. You know, we don't have to put things on the sea or land. We can fight and win in the air. But it's time to start thinking again. It's time to start being disruptive. Time to have the Benny Shrevers of the world, the Doolittles of the world, tell us what the next thing is. And if we put that back into the pipeline and bring in innovators that can build that kind of system, then combining that with what we have today, that sounds like a really dominant posture going into the future. And that sounds like winning and competing to me. I can take a couple of questions, folks. Appreciate your time. Sydney?
Sydney Friedberg, Breaking Defense, for those of you playing along at home. Let me ask, Century Series model is really interesting, but my knowledge of the Century Series is basically a lot of hot aircraft that made big craters in West German landscapes. Mm-hmm. How would that model actually work in the future? Is that kind of sort of open architecture where you keep on plugging new things in to the same airframe, or you keep on putting in new drone systems? What does that look like besides basically lawn darts, which is what we had for the Century Series?
It's a great question, Sydney, because the next Century Series, if we're able to achieve it, and it would be wonderful to say that we're going to do that, but we got a lot of work to do to prep for that. But if we're able to achieve it, it will not look like the first. It will feel like it in spirit, but it will not be the same as the first. We won't go buy aircraft in the hundreds and thousands. But what I think will be the same is families of systems that share commonality, the way that the early Century Series had a lot of commonality, at least in the parts from airplane to airplane. And Sydney, you hit the nail on the head. The way this will work is if we finally achieve open and commonality at the operating system level of the aircraft so that the apps can be different. The training systems for a family of aircraft will need to be common. The support systems for logistics will have to be, or we won't be able to afford the tail of this. We have to be able to reuse things that shouldn't change wildly from aircraft to aircraft. Avionics, flight control, things like this, cockpits, interfaces. You don't have to innovate at them to create a radically different aircraft. You'd really like to get back to where aircraft manufacturing was early on. I wish I could go back in time and just know what it was like when aircraft and aviation was really focused on design. And you could go directly from design and go build it, and you could build it in a couple of years and go fly it. And the reason you could do that is mostly mechanical. You're pushing avionics, you're pushing the boundaries of flight, and that was an awesome period of the Air Force. Still talk about it with this rosy hue in the background and halos overhead. And it's almost reverential when we talk about that period. The only way we'll be able to do that, design and immediately build, is if we bring in digital engineering and openness so that that design is something you can actually go put together without standing up a huge production line. So we are not there. But I see in the tea leaves that path to the future. I see digital engineering taking us there. And it shouldn't just be for airplanes, it should be for satellites too. That sounds like a huge way to be competitive in the future. What would an adversary do facing an Air Force that it knew could design and build a new airplane every 4 years? Incredibly fielded.
Okay, those won't be F-35s, though, where you develop like 6 major breakthroughs in one package, you said.
No, once you have the ability to do things more frequently, you can go from design to build and commonize things across a family of systems. You're not approaching the acquisition as I get the design, I finalize the design, and then I go buy hundreds or 1,000 of them. You just keep spiraling. That's what I love about the early Air Force, is it snapped the chalk line, it built the airplanes, and it went and flew them, and we didn't buy. All the Century Series aircraft weren't successful. But enough were that we call that one of the golden eras of military aviation. So it'll be different, folks. It'll look more high-tech. It'll look more software-intensive than the original Century Series. There's no software to contend with them. But it'll feel like it. That's my hope. And I go there as like my happy place, my place of optimism. And I am told that this is a lofty ambition. This is too much of having your head in the clouds. But there is one place you can have your head in the clouds and your feet on the ground. And that's on the mountaintops. We've got hard work to climb this one to get to do both. But Air Force, we got to go there. Our future is about maintaining the adaptability and the flexibility we've had in the past. Go through every meeting in the Air Force, someone will say, the key to air power, flexibility. Amen. We need that in acquisition more than ever. And we're going there. So bear with us, but know the change is happening. I just couldn't be prouder of what our team is doing.